Bowl games to the north, bowl-bound teams to the south. This is Krown Gridiron Nation on TSN. And welcome to the Hubcast studio in Vancouver, everyone. I'm Jim Mullen. He's Gord Randall. Mike Hogan will be along in a second, and Jesse Palmer will be as well. But right now, it's time to take a look at the best of Canada south of the line in our 2-minute offense. Undefeated Penn State taking on undefeated Minnesota. 4 Canadians in this CanCon Bowl. Ottawa's Jesse Luketa, Jonathan Sutherland, and Brampton's Daniel Joseph for the Nittany Lions versus Montreal's Benjamin St. Just and his Golden Gophers. The Gophers proved that they are for real, leading the whole way in this one, post to post. They got a little scare late, but they would walk away with the win, 31-26. Minnesota now looking like a potential national playoff team. More on this game in a bit. Notre Dame paying a visit to Duke, and the Fighting Irish were tired of playing close games. They found their game again in this one, beating up on Duke en route to a 31-point rout. Abbotsford's Chase Claypool was key for the Irish. He hauled in 5 passes for 97 yards and found the promised land once. Ohio versus Miami, Ohio. Big game for both teams with the winner in the driver's seat to play in the MAC championship. Bobcats quarterback and Oakville native Nathan Rourke did all he could to carry his team to the victory. He threw for a touchdown, added 2 more on the ground, but it would not be enough. The Bobcats lose by 3 to the Redhawks. They now need some help to make it to the MAC championship. Virginia hosting Georgia Tech. The Cavs wideout and Burnaby native Terrell Jano followed up his career game last week with another dandy this time. 9 catches, 108 yards. Virginia gets the big W over Georgia Tech, 33-28. Speaking of bowl-bound teams, the Illinois Illini came back from a 25-point deficit to defeat the Michigan State Spartans. They scored 4 touchdowns in the fourth quarter to complete the comeback. We've been waiting for a breakout game from safety Sidney Brown from London, Ontario. This was it. 13 tackles, 2 interceptions. He took one of them 76 yards to the house for a massive touchdown when the Illini was down by a score. This kid, just in his second year. Brown and Illinois are bowl-bound for the first time since 2014. The last time Minnesota was 9-0, they were tailgating with horses and buggies in the parking lot. Goes way back to 1904, Gord. A great pictures coming out of Minnesota after that win over Penn State, but what now for Penn State?
Well, I will say, if I know anything about the great state of Minnesota, and I don't, they're probably still tailgating with horses and buggies in some places. But for Penn State, it's a complex road to the top 4. It's pretty crowded at the top now. It's a little bit clear for Minnesota as an undefeated team, though they have a ways to go as well. I think they're sitting at number 7 in the latest poll. Penn State, with the 1 loss, they've got to beat Ohio State. They do that, they'll get back into the Big Ten championship game. If they get their revenge on presumably Minnesota, although that's not set in stone either, in the Big Ten championship game to become the Big Ten champion, then they do have a shot. But it's a long road for them with a lot of teams, LSU, Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, Oregon. It's a crowded field at the top, even though Alabama lost this weekend. Voters seem to tend to forgive that for them. They always get their one mulligan for some reason. So there's lots of contenders at the top for Penn State to leapfrog. It's a steep hill for them to climb.
They were popping the champagne corks in Champaign, Illinois. The Illini are bowl-bound, Mike.
Yeah, it's an interesting season to say the least. They started 2-0 and then they lost 4-0, a game they should have won against Eastern Michigan, and then they lost games that maybe they were expected to lose against Minnesota and Michigan, and Nebraska was in there as well. And then they came up with that huge win over number 6 Wisconsin. Nobody saw that coming. They're going to look at this as being such a really key part of the recruiting going forward. So potentially a program-changing victory for Illinois. What I want to know, though, is, one of the major contributors is a safety who had a spectacular game against Michigan State, and, 3rd win in a row for Illinois. I want to know where that safety from London, Ontario, Jim Mullen, ends up on the stateside 5.
Hey, Mike, thanks for stealing my line. In at 5, Montreal native and Minnesota Golden Gopher undefeated. Benjamin St. Juste, the quarterback, had 4 tackles and a key pass breakup in the end zone late. Tennessee's Josh Palmer is back, the Flower City's own, with 4 receptions for 55 yards, including a game-winning TD versus Kentucky. Burnaby's Terrell Jana is back for Virginia, another outstanding effort, 9 receptions, 108 yards versus Georgia Tech in that win over the Yellow Jackets. 52 receptions so far this year. In at 2 at the top of the class, it is Chase Claypool, the BC native. 5 receptions, 97 yards, and a TD in Notre Dame's convincing win over Duke. At 1, it's the defensive back of renown, Mr. Sidney Brown from London, Ontario. He of the Fighting Illini, 13 tackles, 2 interceptions, including a 76-yard pick 6. How about that? Now's the time for Chuba Watch. Well, there wasn't much to watch this week. Chuba Hubbard had a week off. He continues to lead the NCAA in rushing, even though he was parked on that bye week. So now it's time to call in Jesse Palmer. And Jesse, do you think Chuba Hubbard can hold on to that NCAA rushing lead? And does that bring him into the discussion for the Heisman Trophy?
Well, I definitely think Chuba can hold on and win the rushing title. This is an offense right now that is dedicated to running the football, and he's their home run threat. And this guy, with his speed, is breaking off long runs week in, week out. So I don't think the statistics are going to be a problem for Chuba Hubbard. I think the only thing potentially that keeps him out of New York is Oklahoma State's record. Heisman voters like teams with winning records. And the good news right now, the Cowboys are ranked, but they're going to have to keep that up. They're going to have to keep winning. I think Chuba will have a Heisman opportunity moment later this year when they take on Oklahoma. That'll be a big stage. That'll be a lot of people watching that game, waiting to see what Chuba does.
Our thanks to Jesse Palmer in New York. It was Conference Championship Weekend in U Sports. We'll tell you all about it.
In British Columbia's Similkameen Valley, our partner Sunny Dhaliwal and his family grow and pack some of the finest fruit you will ever taste. Thank you, Sunny, for making Krown produce fresh at its best.
Welcome back to the Hubcast Studios in Vancouver, everyone. Well, this is the weekend when you have the best rivalries on tap in Canada across U Sports. It's our 3-minute warning. It's your oldest football trophy on planet Earth, the 112th Yates Cup, McMaster versus Western. The Mustangs looking for their 3rd Yates title in a row. Mac, big underdogs in this one. Looked that way early. Western jumps out to a 10-point first quarter lead, but in the second, Mac came to play, scoring 22 unanswered. Pivot Andreas Dueck led his team on 2 big drives, ending with touchdown runs from Matt Crayson and Justice Allen. Also in the second, bad news for the Stangs. After taking a sack, quarterback Chris Merchant was injured, knocked out of the game. Mac led 22-10 at the half. With no Merchant to be seen in the second, Mac's defense took over, picking off the Stangs' backup Kevin John twice. The Marauders would add another TD in the fourth, and the upset was complete. The McMaster Marauders, your Yates Cup champs, after handing Western its first loss to an OUA opponent since the 2016 Yates Cup. Dunsmore Cup, Montreal versus Laval. We've seen this 7 years in a row. Laval has won the last 3. Those Carbs got the scoring started late in the first. Former McGill quarterback Frederick Paquette-Perot finds Kevin Kaya from 26 out for a tutty. FPP would follow that up in the second with another passing TD, this time finding Raif-Jean Giroux from 10 yards out. Montreal took a 16-3 lead in the half. Mon Dieu! Fast forward to late in the third, and the Carbs put this one away. Laval lining up for the field goal, but it's a fake! Zach Fitzgerald throws it up, and Marc-Antoine Decoy picks it up. He goes 85 yards to La Maison for the touche. Laval would score late in the fourth. It doesn't matter. The Carbs are the RSEQ champs, defeating the Rouge et Or 25-10. The Loney Bowl, Acadia hosting Bishops, and the Gators clock struck midnight on their Cinderella season. The Axemen had no issues, winning by 30. The AUS leading rusher, Dale Wright, scored all the TDs for Acadia. 3 of them also added 118 yards of ground chuck. For the second time in 3 years, the Acadia Axemen win the Loney Bowl. It's the 83rd running of the Hardy Cup. Sask Calgary rematch of last year's final, where it was the Huskies moving on. A much different story this time around. This was supposed to be a track meet. The track was frozen. It just turned out to be the shot put event. Calgary held Sask to only 4 points while scoring 29, 3 touchdowns. Niagara found Tyson Philpott from 30 yards out and Josiah Joseph with 2 QB keeper majors. The Dinos are back where they belong, Hardy Cup champs. Mike, the toughest thing for me with the Yates Cup was to see Chris Merchant leave the game around the end of the first and never come back. I know you and I had a discussion after the MAC Western game earlier this season, a 34-17 win for Western, that these two teams matched up in a bit of an odd way, and that gave MAC a chance in November, and sure enough, they cashed in when they had the opportunity.
Yeah, and it's really difficult. I mean, I feel so sorry for Merchant, who, we kind of had as, I don't know if he was our consensus pick to be the Crichton winner this year, but, such a great player, best player in the conference. It's such a key position, and it's just another one in a long list. I mean, now you've got Merchant and Michael Falls and Donnie Marshall and Will Finch. All have either been injured in a Yates Cup final or in the semifinal, and have either had to miss a game or really, really halted or hindered what they could do. So, you take that guy out and put in a backup quarterback who only had a handful of snaps all season, partly because Western wasn't coming up with those 75-2 wins like they've been doing over the last few years. And it's just an impossible hill to climb against a really good defense, a veteran secondary particularly. And, Andreas Dueck's playing spectacular football. It really sets up an interesting matchup next week as they head out west to take on Calgary.
Gord, one Dunsmore Cup, 2 very different teams and very different approaches going into that game.
Yeah, I mean, from what we heard, Montreal was very relaxed and laid back about this game. And frankly, I know there's a lot at hand, but you're going in on the road as a likely underdog, but you also have the confidence to fall back on that you've beaten this team in the past. And they approached the game with a laid-back, relaxed attitude. Things are going to be what they will be, and I believe the French call that laissez-faire. On the Laval side, from what I understand, this is a team that was pretty wound up this week and maybe feeling the pressure a little bit. Again, to borrow a hockey term, they're squeezing the sticks a little bit, and we saw that all afternoon. Kudos to Montreal. On offense, they put up a whopping 2 touchdowns on the Laval defense, which is huge by the standards of this rivalry. And then the game-changing play, the fake kick from Laval that turns into an 85-yard interception return for a touchdown by Marc-Antoine Dequoy to salt it away. And kudos to the whole Montreal defense as well. Laval got next to nothing going on the ground. They finished with 63 yards on the day, and about half of that was in the fourth quarter after the game was salted away. So a really good performance all around from the Carabins, and they look like they have to be considered the favorites given all the other things going on to win the Vanier Cup at this point in time, I'd say.
Mike, what should we take away from Acadia's dominant performance in the Loney Bowl?
Well, that Acadia took care of business, which is exactly what they had to do. I mean, they kind of had the checklist of play really well in the regular season, check. Win the regular season, check. Finish undefeated, check. Blow out their opponent in the championship game, check. Now it's up to Jeff Cummins and the rest of Acadia to shut up critics like me and everybody across the country who doesn't think they can compete with Quebec. I hope I'm wrong. I hope a week from now we're talking about one of the great upsets in Canadian youth sports history, and now it's up to Jeff and company to prove everybody wrong and go out and really, if not win, at least put up a really good fight against the Cube.
One big game south of the line, 3 bowl games north of the border.
From the Similkameen Valley in British Columbia to the Western Cape of South Africa, our global network of grower partners produce the finest fruits and vegetables for Canadians. Those partners make Krown produce fresh at its best.
3 bowl games in Canada, but 1 game you should watch south of the line. These are our game previews. And those Golden Gophers row the boat to 10-0. The Iowa Hawkeyes, they are the Rapids. 3 games left for undefeated Minnesota, and this could be the toughest, especially because it's on the road.
That's right, Big Ten Conference play rolls on, and fresh off the biggest win in recent conference history, the Golden Gophers of Minnesota travel into Iowa City to play the Iowa Hawkeyes. Now, Iowa's flown a little bit under the radar in the Big Ten because they've been very good but just not great and haven't been able to overcome that hump. But this is definitely a challenge for Minnesota as they risk an emotional letdown after the big win at home, and they have to travel on the road to face a very stingy Iowa team in a tough environment. This is going to be a real slobber knocker between two tough defenses and Tanner Morgan and a very strong Minnesota offense.
Mitchell Bowl, Mac is back, this time against black and blue Calgary. Yeah, they wear red, but they certainly are beaten up. Can Calgary's makeshift lineup find a way against a Marauder D who is firing on all cylinders? Mike, outside of what we talked about in the previous segment, I think maybe the most compelling thing, or at least a sideline here to the Mitchell Bowl, is Steph Potasic doing a tour of duty in the Canada West as an offensive coordinator with UBC last year. So he's got a pretty good vision of what Calgary does on defense. There's also another matchup here that you want to talk about.
Well, absolutely, because you've got two guys, and similarly, you've got the offensive coordinator at Calgary, Pat Sheehan, who has seen McMaster's defense fairly regularly, and including last year when he was the head coach at Queens. So you've got this matchup between the two offensive coordinators, and these guys have gone head-to-head a lot. You go back to Steph Potasic when he was at Laurier, and then at McMaster as a head coach. These guys have met 11 times in the regular season, and it's Potasic up 6-5, so it's been fairly close. In the playoffs, though, again, it's Potasic 3-1, and the only time that Pat Sheehan beat a Steph Potasic team in the postseason, they went on to win the Vanier Cup, and I'm sure that's a game that Gord Randall remembers very fondly.
I remember more of the ensuing games when we took on Western in the Yates Cup, Laval in the semi, and then Calgary in the final, but it was an important stepping stone for us on that championship run. Worth noting, by the way, as his son Ryan Sheehan, the Guelph head coach, pointed out on Twitter, Pat Sheehan's now won the Dunsmore Cup, the Yates Cup, and the Hardy Cup as a head coach. So consider me a fan of him taking a job in the AUS so he can officially run the table and win a Loney Bowl as well. But for me, I said a couple weeks ago that whoever came out of the OUA, in my opinion, was a favorite against whoever came out of the Canada West, despite the fact they'd be going out west to play that game. And I'm going to stand by that. I think Mac is the favorite in this game, purely because in watching that effort from Calgary, they were opportunistic. Last weekend, they weren't overwhelming. And Mac, on the other hand, despite the quarterback injury on the other side, I felt like they earned that victory a little bit more. And I still think that the OUA's level of play this whole season has been a lot higher than the Canada West. So my favorite going into that game is Mac.
An Ontario team has not won in Western Canada in a bowl game since Queens did it in 1968. UTEC Bowl, Acadia hosting Montreal. Is this the year the AUS dog has some bite? Acadia, perfect so far, as they face a Caravans team coming off an emotional upset victory on the road. You never know. They're at home, they're competitive. Is there a better chance for an AUS team in this last decade to make a game of it in the UTEC Bowl?
I would say it's one of the best shots they've had, if not the best. Now, peak St. FX from a few years back with Tavon Cook may beg to differ, but this Acadia team has been dominant through conference play, as we mentioned. They've faced and surmounted every challenge that's been put in front of them to this point, and Hunter Gennard and his set of weapons on the Acadia offense, including national team alumnus Gordon Mulally, look like they might have the juice to be able to challenge Montreal and their stereotypical smothering RSEQ defense. They really shut down Laval last weekend, particularly on the ground. Laval still put up about 360 yards of offense, so nothing spectacular, but their bend and not break forced Laval to settle for threes instead of sevens. They never let them into the end zone. Acadia is going to have to change that because they are not going to be able to win a low-scoring game. Hunter Gennard's going to have to be a superstar if they can pull this off. If he is, then they might have a chance.
Hey, there's one more bowl game. CJFL Championship, the Canadian Bowl. Hilltops versus the world. Actually, it's Saskatoon at Langley Saturday. Both these teams are undefeated. Saskatoon, they are going for their 6th national championship in a row on Saturday. It would be their 9th title in 10 years. Coming up next, it's our Weekend Warriors. You better hang around. There it is, your Power 7 Acadia in at 4. To quote Eddie Vedder, they're still alive. That's why they're there. The guys that didn't make it, Laval, Western, and Saskatchewan in that order. At least Saskatchewan can look forward to some individual hardware at the Vanier Cup banquet. Weekend Warriors to you, Mike.
Well, let's go to McMaster, and you look at their team, and maybe the strength is their veteran secondary, but one guy stands out, and he's a freshman. Josh Cumber, who's a redshirt freshman from Cambridge. He's only 5'6", and it looked like Western going in really wanted to target him. And why not? You've got a 6'4" receiver, Brett Ellerman, first-team All-Star in the OUA, and they went after him, and the fifth year did nothing against the freshman who gave away so much height. And they, not only with Ellerman, but they tried to pick on him all day long, and he just denied them. So, on a team with so many veterans, I'm going to go with the freshman, Josh Cumber, as my weekend warrior.
For my weekend warrior, we're going to head out to Laval, Provence, and Marc-Antoine Dequoy, who returned an interception 85 yards for a touchdown late in the third quarter to basically salt the game away with a quarter to go. And kill Laval for good. But he was strong all day long, 6.5 tackles from his secondary spot to lead a Montreal defense that, as I mentioned, was stout throughout the game, and the game was won pretty much on their back. Marc-Antoine Dequoy is my weekend warrior.
Triple W2K, we're on a two-shot. He's the only other guy here. Way you go. Come on.
What I want to know is, was this episode 1 of 2 for Penn State, Minnesota, and can we please get a rematch in the Big Ten title game? Guys, this was a fantastic game throughout, and I would love to see these two teams play each other, not the least of which is because I'm kind of tired of seeing Ohio State be on top. And Ohio State just lost their best player, Chase Young, to a dubious NCAA suspension for that Penn State game in a couple weeks' time. So Penn State at home has a really good shot in that one. If they can win that and Minnesota wins out against a couple of their tough tests, we could see a rematch in that Big Ten championship game of the game that for about an hour was the most exciting college football game of the season, and I got rightfully raked over the coals for calling that one out a little too soon on Twitter this past weekend.
What I want to know is who's going to play quarterback for Calgary this week, and yes, it matters. Adam Sinagra maybe didn't have the same kind of season he had a year ago, but he's still, when he's on, as good as anybody in the country. And with Josiah Joseph, you get a completely different style quarterback, a guy who can move around quite a bit. Now, what becomes interesting here is if it's Joseph, Scott Brady, the defensive coordinator at Mac, I thought his best job of the season by far came against Waterloo, who's got a very mobile quarterback in Trey Ford. So it becomes a really interesting game depending on who the quarterback is for Calgary.
Tune into our podcast this week. Gordon and I will talk about my trip to London where I met the whole world of international football. It was an interesting trip. But for now, this is Jim Bullen saying, let's get out to the game.